Jim Detert, you are a professor of business administration in the leadership and organizational behavior area at the University of Virginia. Your work focuses on workplace courage, on why people speak up or stay silent at work, on ethical decision making and behavior, and on other leadership related topics. Today, we will speak about your book, Choosing Courage, the everyday guide to being brave at work. Jim, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, Jim, as I'm reading your book, I had to tell you, I had to be frank with you and with my audience. I see all the opportunities that I have missed in the past to be courage. I have seen sexism, I have seen racism. When I was younger, I even participated in some of those conversations, and today I feel ashamed. And of course, we all grow wiser and older, and we adjust to society's rules and best form of behavior. But as I feel like I should have read your book when I was 17 years old, and not when now that I'm 53. Regardless, thank you so much for writing it.
Yeah, you're more than welcome. And the truth, I think, for all of us is that we all have our own journey. And for some of us, when you think about being courageous, whether it's in your work life or your personal life, the challenges are around opportunities we wish we had taken and didn't, sort of a failure to act. And in other cases, it's that we did act, but we didn't do so very skillfully. And so, we might have stood up for something, or we might have taken a prudent risk, but we did it in such a way that we weren't very effective in getting the change we wanted, or we just alienated people. And I think it's sad for all. You mentioned shame. I often use the word regret. I'm 50 now, and there are so many things I can't remember, but I can still remember like they were yesterday, some opportunities in even elementary school where, I saw somebody being picked on, and I could have chosen to stand up or stand with that person, and I didn't. And I too feel regret about those opportunities. And so one of the big messages of the book is, if you want to, as you age, if you want to have fewer regrets and be prouder of your legacy, it's important now to learn how to start standing up and doing so effectively.
Okay, well, thank you for that. That makes me feel a little bit better. So, Jim, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your background. You are a professor in business administration, but I'm sure that was not always you. Can you tell us why, first of all, you decided to go into academics, and then, yeah, a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, I've been asked that question a fair number of times, and I always wish I had some, beautiful aha moment to share, when it all came together for me. But there really isn't one. I think I was one of those kids and then young adults who just truly loved learning, loved to read, loved to think, loved to write. And so, my transition into the life of a social scientist was, I think, more just sort of a progression of being clear about other roads I didn't want to take, and just ended up, continuing to love this path. In terms of this particular area, again, there's no magical story other than that early in my PhD program, I had an opportunity to do a large project on a company's speaking up initiative. And it just fascinated me. And, more than 20 years later, it's become my life's work. And, looking back, I can certainly connect to aspects of my childhood and the kind of authority figures I was around and things like that, that have led me to appreciate, they say all research is me search, right? Like in some way or another, you are called to areas either, you're not very good at and wish you were, or strengths. And so for me, certainly, going back to, I guess sort of my own challenges in this area, I've always been somebody who has sort of spoken up, stood out, been willing to non-conform. But I haven't always been somebody who's been particularly skilled at how I did it. And so I think while people would tend to describe me as courageous, sort of throughout my life, I don't think they always would have described me as particularly effective in conveying the message or in managing to create change without offense. And so for me, that's really been the journey, is how can I do this? Not just how can I do it, but how can I do it better?
And what was the motivation of writing the book? I mean, you are busy, you have all these classes. I'm sure you have plenty of students begging you for your time. So you took the time to sit down and write this book.
Yeah, I think it came together for me in several ways, again, over a period of time. I mean, one is that I teach all kinds of leadership classes at all different levels, MBA, executive MBA, executive audiences. And, repeatedly when we would finish time together, I would say, look, we've covered this and this and this, and if we had more time, we could add more tools. But I would also say my strong belief is that even if we had more time and we added more tools, it wouldn't matter how many tools you had in your toolkit if when the time came for action, you were too afraid to use them, it wouldn't matter. What you
Right.
ultimately need if you're going to be a great leader is you need the courage to use your tools. And over and over, people said to me, wow, that's what the course should have been about. That's what we need help with. Uh, and after hearing that over and over, I started to look into it, and I just realized I agreed with them, but there was no such book out there. There was really no such guide available. And so, 7 to 10 years ago, I decided, I'm going to take that on as my mission. I'm going to provide that. If I'm going to give this lecture over and over that this is what it's about, then I have to provide some better advice.
Right. Okay. So in our everyday life, we see examples of courage, and some of those examples of courage are not magnified by the press. We see a person doing the right thing here and there, but at the same time, we see lack of courage, and it's so obvious. I give you an example. I just finished watching this video of this Oriental woman, 65-year-old woman, beaten in New York in the middle of the street by a man because she was Asian. And there were people around it, and no one, people just went the other side of the street. No one even say anything to that man. So I wonder if we are in a courage deficit, or I hope to think that was just an isolated case where there was not a courageous person in that moment, but in general we are courageous.
Well, I don't want to rain on any possible parade, but I actually think you're right. I think we have a pretty large deficit of courage. Most instances, thankfully, are not as obviously harmful as that kind of neglect. And there are some unique dynamics to large bystander situations, right? So um, there's a particular psychology around why do many people potentially witnessing an act like that not intervene, and some of it has to do with false beliefs about who else will do it or whose responsibility it is. In the workplace, often though, we know darn well it's sort of up to us or it's our responsibility. And the sad truth is, we don't do it nearly enough, and we don't do it enough because the same, in essence, the same fears that stop somebody from intervening in the situation you described are the same underlying reasons we don't intervene at work. So as humans, we have a lot of fears, right? We're in work organizations, we're afraid of career or economic consequences. Our boss could fire us or hold us back from promotion or otherwise harm us. We have social fears. We don't want people to we don't want people to be, we don't want to lose friends. We don't want to be excluded. We don't want to sort of, be ostracized. And we have psychological fears. We don't want to step outside our comfort zone and try things and look stupid and be embarrassed. And then finally, in all too many cases, we also have physical fears. In most workplaces, the physical fears are not as extreme, but you could imagine in the kind of case you described, there is an actual physical element to the reason to not intervene. And so if you put it all together, there are a whole lot of reasons that people don't act courageously even when they could or should.
And so how will you define courage in the workplace? What is it that will define us as a courageous person?
So two things. First, I tend to differentiate between a courageous person and a courageous act.
Mm.
And I'm more interested in courageous acts because I think when we talk about courageous people, it's too easy to slip into the logic of thinking that there's some innate personality type, that some of us are born ready to be courageous or be skillfully courageous. And beyond the fact that I'm aware of no evidence that actually shows that to be true, it also lets too many of us let ourselves off the hook, right? So if we can just fall back behind, well, we can't all be Gandhi or we can't all be Nelson Mandela, well, then we don't have to act, right?
Mm.
On the other hand, if we say, look, we're not interested in the courageous person. What we're interested in courageous acts, doing things when you could or should, then everybody becomes both able to do that and responsible to do that. And also, when I say responsible, it becomes a choice you can make to practice developing the skills you would need to be successful. And, if you conclude, oh, it's just a birthright, why would you bother to practice? So I'm not interested in sort of courage as a trait. I'm interested in courage as a learned and practiced behavior.
Okay, so I get that we can learn. This is a skill that we can learn, develop, maybe start with a little act of courage and then build it up to bigger acts of courage. How can we develop that skill? It's just as simple as what I just said, or is there some particular actions that we could take in order to become more courageous or participate in more courageous acts?
So I think there's sort of two parts to what you've said there. One is I think each of us does need to think about for ourselves, what are a set of important acts or types of behaviors we would like to do more of, or do more regularly, or do with more skill. So, it could be having honest conversations with peers, who behave inappropriately, say, offensive things. It could be speaking up or, just public presentations to authority figures. It could be, willingness to sort of take more bold, innovative actions. It could be a whole host of things, right? But for each of us, because of where we've come from and who we are, there are different things that would be really scary and then less so and less so on down. And so I encourage people to build a courage ladder, thinking about, putting one type of behavior on each rung of the ladder. And then to start at the bottom. And the reason I think that's important is, imagine that you decided you were going to, take up a new sport. You said, I'd like to run a marathon someday. Well, I think we can agree that the most foolish thing you could do is try to go out and run 40 some kilometers the first day, right? You would hurt yourself. Well, first of all, you probably wouldn't try at all. And if you did, you would hurt yourself to such an extent, you would conclude, that's the dumbest thing I ever did, and you wouldn't go running ever again, right? So the first thing you have to do, I think, is you have to build a courage ladder, and you have to decide to start with a manageable thing. You have to start somewhere you could have some reasonable chance of succeeding or it going well enough that you would be motivated to keep working at it. And then the second thing you have to do is you have to develop new skills. I can choose, for example, to learn to play golf, but if nobody ever helps me develop a better swing, I'm going to be as bad at golf after a year or two as I was when I started. And so I think there's really three kinds of skills you have to learn. One is to master, or to begin to master anyway, how you feel. When you're in any situation that makes you afraid or angry, or sad, can you sort of control your own emotions enough that it doesn't override your ability to behave skillfully? We've all seen people who get so afraid they either sort of run away from the situation or they attack in the situation. They do something, but they're so angry it doesn't go well. So one is you have to master your emotions. The second area is you have to work on mastering how you think. In addition to what we say out loud, we also always have sort of an inner dialogue going on, right? So imagine that, you're presenting a new idea to your boss and he or she just starts to shake their head a little bit, or says, well, I don't know, it's tough times. Right away in your head, what's the dialogue? It's probably for many of us things like, oh, here we go again. He always hates my ideas. She's never interested. She never listens. And so if you can't learn to replace that internal dialogue with a more positive set of messages, you don't need the outside world to beat you. The inside, you're beating yourself up, right? And then the third thing is concrete behavioral skills. Can you really listen? Can you really frame issues in a way that persuades, that connects? Can you show empathy? When somebody's upset, do you have some skills for calming them down and staying in the conversation? There are lots and lots of communication tools, but most of us just did not learn them or master them growing up. And so you have to be willing to put in the work to learn them and then practice them.
Right. Well, I want to believe that most organizations are making an effort to be fairer, to have a better work environment, this and that. But there are organizations, at least to a period of time, that they are toxic. For example, I can think of Uber at the beginning. It was a sexist organization and females were mistreated. I think of WeWork as well, with all these rave parties that they were doing, that there were a lot of drug consumptions and sexism and all this and that. Sure, a person, I guess, a courageous enough person would be willing to put his job in the line in order to, I don't know, speak out against, hey, this woman just got grabbed there or something. I don't know how far should we stick our neck out.
Yeah, it's a really important question, and of course I can't answer that for anybody else. I can answer that for myself, right? And you're the same. I guess what I would encourage people to think about is uh, really asking the question: is, if I stay in this organization, can I realistically help address or improve this issue? And if the answer is yes, then I believe in the adage, you gotta be in the game to change the game.
Right.
And then I think it's about, saying, okay, I will stay. But the truth is, in a lot of cases, in our heart of hearts, we don't believe there's anything we can do to make it better. We know it's toxic, and we know we don't have the power, the authority, the influence to actually make a difference. And I do think in those moments, and it's a very difficult moment, we sort of face the choice. In those moments, often the most courageous thing to do is to be willing and able to leave.
Mm. Okay, how about this other example? I'm sure everyone knows the textbook scenario of Kodak. They saw the digital camera coming. I'm sure one or two or someone must have said something. Hey, maybe we shouldn't focus so much on film, and maybe we should focus on this thing called the digital camera. And I guess some of those employees were completely ignored. I mean, what's the solution there? I mean, no one had disrespected you. It's just a difference of opinion, but it's an opinion that you can see will sink the ship. You stay with the sinking ship until the last moment.
Yeah. Well, again, so setting aside the issue of whether or when you choose to get off the ship, the Kodak is sort of a well-known example, but these things happen all the time, right? Especially the older an organization is, the stronger its culture, the prouder its history and people. People have a hard time. Organized groups of people have a hard time letting go of what they've always known and what has always worked for something new. And again, sometimes no best effort is going to change it. And indeed, there's going to be massive organizational decline or possibly death. In other cases, and I don't know the Kodak case well enough at all to speak about it, there are ways we can be more effective in trying to make our points. So for example, again, no clue whether this was true at Kodak, but it's possible that the senior decision makers only really reacted to great opportunities to be number one or number two in any segment in their industry. And that the people coming to them saying, hey, we need to move toward this, digital environment, we're saying threat, threat, threat. If we don't do this, we're going to be in trouble. We're going to lose market share. We're
Right.
going to be doomed. And maybe threat language is not the way
Mm.
senior leaders reacted. They needed opportunity framing. Sometimes people frame things as, all about this is who we are, this is our culture, this is why we need to do this. It's our essence. But senior decision makers are really only compelled by, here's the economic reason we better do this. And of course, sometimes it's the opposite. And so again, I don't know the specifics of Kodak, but what I do know is that the general mistake we make when we try to persuade somebody to do something is we pitch it, we sell it from our point of view, what makes sense to us. So if I'm more compelled by threat framing, if I'm more compelled by cultural framing, that's the way I'm likely to sell it to you. But if I had all the resources or decision-making rights, I don't have to come to you anyway. The whole reason I'm coming to you is I need you to buy in. And that makes your way of seeing the world most important. And so that's why there's so many important things about how we frame messages. And it's also why perspective taking and listening are such important skills. Because if I don't really listen to you, or if I don't really inquire about how you see the world or what's keeping you up at night, what you're worried about, how can I frame appropriately what I'm trying to get you to do?
Right. Okay, Jim, in order to give the listeners a taste of your book, you open the book with a story of this ESPN broadcaster, Stuart Scott, and the courageous decision that he took. Could you just retell that story to the listeners?
Sure. So Stuart Scott, an amazing human being who unfortunately we lost to cancer a few years ago. And that's the story many people know about Stuart Scott from ESPN, was his courageous cancer battle. But what many fewer know is that when he first started at ESPN, he was really the first big time Black American anchor on ESPN Sports Center, their flagship show. And Stewart used all sorts of turns of phrases that were very common in the African American community. He spoke in ways that really resonated. Um, Unfortunately, that upset a lot of the sort of white brass, the white hierarchy at ESPN. And it got to the point where they called him in and essentially said, knock it off. And it was implied that if he didn't stop using this certain kind of language, his job would be at risk. And, that was a real problem for him because he felt like in order to, maintain this job that had been a lifelong dream in which, he loved and felt impactful in, was being pitted against his values and his beliefs about who he was authentically and who he was speaking to. And so he thought about it for a while, and eventually what he did is he went on air and publicly he said, today I want to take a moment to thank the senior leadership of ESPN for their deep and utter commitment to more inclusive language and to having somebody like me speak the way I do as their anchor. It shows a tremendous growth in the way we think about a more diverse world. And of course, having done that, there was no way ESPN could then turn around and fire him for doing that. Now, it's a pretty high risk strategy, so I'm not sure it applies to all of us. But I think it's a really nice example of somebody trying very hard and ending up being very skillful in finding a way to sort of hold true to themselves or be authentic to themselves and not, the world is filled with demands for conformity, asking us to be like everybody else is being. And I love that story because it was a brilliant way he figured out how to continue to be himself.
Well, I just want to share with the listeners that there are many other stories like that, and it's basically this book is a blueprint on how we can become more courageous at work. Jim, can you tell us one more time the title of the book and where people can follow you?
Sure. So the book is called Choosing Courage: Everyday Strategies for Being Brave at Work. It's by Harvard Business Review Press. It's available on Amazon and everywhere else. You can buy books. And I'd be delighted if you'd follow me on LinkedIn or Facebook. And if you go to my website, which is just jimdetert.com, you can not only learn more about the book and about my work in general, you can also download the first chapter of the book for free.
Right. And yeah, to the listeners, one more time, I wish I would have read this book when I was 17. It would have saved me so much regret, many inactions in my life. And yeah, I hope you check it out. Jim, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.